Two users placed a request at the same time, resulting in a duplication of the Jaglion. This was a system error. Because it was Christmas Day, site developers were off duty. A moderator instructed the owner of the duplicated Jaglion to remove the lion from gameplay. The in-game terminology for this is to kill the lion. For those of you who don't know, Lioden is a lion breeding simulator. Lioden is to lions what Gran Turismo is to racing. It's not a game, it's a simulator. It's a very complicated and authentic browser-based lion simulator that happens to have sparkle lions and cryptid hybrids. In the words of Lioden, you become the king of your very own pride of lionesses, breed the best cubs, defend your territory, and battle other lions for supremacy. In this video, we're going to talk about what happened on Lioden when breeding the best cubs was less than a walk in the savannah. At its heart, Lioden is a breeding sim that means business. The users respond in kind. That's why all hell broke loose when it came out that the breeding mechanics didn't work like users expected. And then, years later, a separate scandal revolved around the ownership and mandated unceremonial killing of a rare hybrid. These events were notable because of how seriously the Lioden user base takes the game. In order to understand the drama underfoot, we need to talk a little bit about the basic mechanics of Lioden. You steer a lion through a virtual life cycle. There are the usual browser-based game minigames like lion-themed Bejeweled, but there's also sending your lionesses on hunts, exploring different biomes, running a shop. But the most important aspect is your pride. Within your pride, you have your main lion, lionesses, submissive males, and cubs. The vast majority of gameplay revolves around customizing lions by either applying aesthetic changes manually or by breeding offspring by selectively choosing desirable parents. Users can request other lions sire cubs through a studding system, and forums facilitate advertising these services. Different events throughout the year provide the opportunity to attain new customizations that are either decorations or impact the genetics of a lion. The breeding function isn't risque by any stretch of the imagination. Lion husbandry requires selecting a name from a drop-down and clicking a button. Sometimes you have to press the button several times if the lioness has lower fertility. The real complication comes from understanding how Lioden genetics work. Each lion has a set of genetics. When a lion is born, it inherits traits from both parents according to the probabilities of their parents' genes passing on. This impacts things like how strong is the lion, which is a non-visual stat. Then there are visual traits, the base color of the lion, its eye color, mane type, mane color, but also its markings. These traits can be inherited or they can be added to a lion. There are many ways a user can acquire an applicator for traits. Some trait applicators are only available rarely at a great cost in either earned or premium currency, which is exchanged for real money. There are annual events that may offer applicators as prizes. Some traits enter gameplay through raffle lionesses, where one user can win a lioness after winning a site-wide raffle. This would keep the trait rare, leaving distribution of the gene up to the owner to now breed offspring with the trait and sell or gift that offspring. The rarity of different traits make different lions or applicators more valuable. Since these lions live limited lifespans, there is pressure to be the best steward of a lion's genetic traits. Every real-life day is a month on Lioden, and lions pass away at 15 years old. Days only count if you log in and trigger a rollover on your account. So that is a relief if you know something's coming up and you won't be able to log in for a few months or even years. Because lions have finite lifespans, it's common for users to take breaks for years at a time. Lioden users take their lions very seriously, and many would rather not play than play and fail to properly steward their pride. If a user wants to preserve a desirable trait or genetic, then they will need to figure out how to breed it into a new generation. On some other breeding sims like Flight Rising, almost all traits fall into one of 5 rarities, ranging from plentiful to rare, and there's a flat rate for passing between 2 rarities. For instance, if the mother has a rare trait and the father has a plentiful trait, there will always be a 99% chance that any given offspring will inherit the plentiful trait and a 1% chance for the rare trait. These 5 rarity tiers impact genes and breeds. Lioden is much more complicated and intentionally so. As of the first story we'll highlight from 2022, the game co-owners still wanted to maintain a sense of mystery over how the breeding mechanics worked. In 2025, Lioden released a new type of hybrid lion based on a cryptid called the Mingua. Here's a sample of the complications around breeding a Mingua. When breeding a Mingua to a non-Mingua, the following applies. The lioness in the breeding, whether she is the Mingua or not, must have 100% fertility in order for the mutation to pass. The base rate for passing with just one parent is 3%. For each parent that has a golden color group base, this increases by 1% each. This is just the start of the Mingua details. The team laid out all of the variables of things that can impact mutation passing to a second generation. I think we would all prefer it if I don't spend well over a minute and a half going into the specifics. Just know that the explanation is very granular. It's notable that the team is forthcoming with the variables and likelihoods of breeding a Mingua. The drama I'm going to get into is what happened when variables and likelihoods were not elucidated. I wouldn't be surprised if the fallout of the scandal led to the team deciding to be clearer about inputs and outputs. But this drama didn't have anything to do with breeding mutations or hybrids. It was about something that the user base thought to be relatively straightforward: markings. Each lion is born with 10 slots for markings. Markings can include a color overlay, stripes, points, speckled coloring, etc. The order of the slots reflect their position in the lion's image rendering, meaning that slot 1 is below slot 2, which is below slot 3, and so on. Users can purchase up to 10 more additional slots. The slots aren't only a binary, meaning either they have a marking or they don't. They also have an opacity. Opacity is a measurement of transparency. This means that a lion could have no marking in slot 1, a stripe marking in slot 2 at 90% opacity, and a lace marking in slot 3 at 5% opacity. This would result in slot 2 being the most visible, despite it being layered under slot 3. For many years, users were told that opacity was purely cosmetic. Opacity was not a variable in whether or not offspring would receive a marking. This turned out to not be true. Our story starts on April 29, 2022 on the bug board. The bug board is a forum where users can submit bugs, get feedback from other users, and hopefully a solution or a workaround by developers. A user submitted a topic called Oddly Specific Marking/Breeding Bug and outlined their trials and measurements around passing a marking to offspring. The user bred dozens of lions and failed to pass the marking, which was a slot 7 quartz inverted zebra. After these several attempts, the user decided to use a tool called the scrying stone to preview potential offspring and recorded the outcomes. It costs 10 silver beetles every time a user runs the scrying stone, which is the earned currency. The user trialed outcomes with markings in different slots and found that while the test variables passed around 50%, their goal marking had a 25% pass chance. In this topic, the user cited a 2017 mod post where the moderator ran their own trials and vouched that between 2 parents with 10 markings each, the pass rate of either parent's markings should be 50% over time. The moderator shared the results over 32 cubs in a now removed Google Sheet. This moderator comment was in response to a claim that a father's markings were biased over a mother's. The specific point being made was that there was no bias in favoring either a male or female's marking contributions. Let's bring it back to the oddly specific marking/breeding bug. The user wanted to pass slot 7 quartz inverted zebra, and it's passing at a 25% pass rate. Historical moderator content claims that the likelihood of a marking passing should be at 50%. So what's going on? An admin with the username of Michael responds to the thread. Michael verifies that if one parent has a marking and the other doesn't,
it is indeed a 50-50 chance that the marking in that slot will pass.
But that confirmation only comes after the gut punch of this revelation. The marking in question was too low of an opacity.
Marking opacities do not pass at a fixed rate. It is an average of the opacities in the 2 slots, with a variable in the range of -10% to 10%.
The admin, Michael, explained the ranges in some scenarios of marking succeeding or being discarded in offspring. In response, the original poster shared links to several threads where it was confirmed that opacity did not impact the pass rate of a marking. These threads were not submitted in the bug board, but instead in the game help forum. The confirmations were provided by owls, who are community contributors. Users who frequently participate in the game help forum may be rewarded with the owl icon. Owls are not staff, they're not moderators, and they're not administrators. These threads spanned 2017 through 2020, demonstrating for how long it was communicated and understood that opacity was not a factor in offspring receiving markings. To this, Michael defended that no one had ever reported this as a bug, and that they did not know where those people got their information.
The marking system has been the same for years and years, and anyone who is able to see the difference in how often a marking shows up when it has a higher opacity versus a very low opacity.
To add insult to injury, he then added that
Players on Wolfden discovered the formula relatively quickly through their findings.
Wolfden is a sister game to Lioden, where instead of emulating a lion, you are a wolf. This logic was contrary to messaging shared on Wolfden in a post from 2020. The thread was called "Welcome to Wolfden Early Access," and it plainly stated, "We would like to advise that if you are here from Lioden, please treat Wolfden as if it is a completely different game. There are a lot of similarities between the two games, but there are also a lot of differences. Be wary of assuming that all basic mechanics work the same way as they do on Lioden." While Michael thought it was plain and clear this mechanic could be identical between the sister sites, users had actively been warned to not draw that same conclusion. At this point, several users joined the thread to get more clarification and to request widespread dissemination of this discovery. Some of these users were owls who had operated under the assumption that opacity was not influential in inheritance. The sentiment was consistent through all these posts that the users thought communication had been misleading on this variable. The upset could have been tempered with an acknowledgement that communication had been imperfect. If Michael had capitulated that communication had been misleading and signaled that a news post could be shared, I believe things would have settled down. In this type of situation, it can be hard to know the right and wrong thing to do. The owners and developers have an interest in keeping mystery around the breeding variables. The users have an interest in uncovering those mysteries. The admin is caught between those competing interests. At the same time, the users in the thread were upset by this uncovering. I think it's natural to become defensive when people direct their frustrations at you. In a perfect world, all of us would default to our better angels in situations where we feel threatened. Ideally, all parties involved in an argument would strive to see the valid points made by either side. Michael did not capitulate. In the next post Michael made outlined that owls are not infallible, that users ought to report bugs when things aren't working, and then doubled down defending that opacity does not influence gene passing. In some argumentation theory, there's this technique where debaters can agree to taboo a word. That is, to discontinue using it in the discussion. Sometimes people have differing definitions for a word, and banning it from conversation helps clarify what people are actually trying to communicate. It would have been useful in this discussion to taboo the word pass, or the idea of pass rates, because it looks like the different parties were using it in two different ways. It appears to me like Michael was outlining a two-step process, where first it was decided whether or not a marking would pass to offspring, which is influenced by the parents having a marking in that slot. Then the second step would be whether or not that marking appears, as in if the opacity succeeds to register above 0%. Both of these steps need an affirmative result for the offspring to inherit a gene. However, the other participants in the conversation referred to gene inheritance as passing. This is a semantic argument and could benefit from a timeout on the idea of passing. But that didn't happen, so Michael hunkered down on the argument that opacity didn't impact the pass rate. In this framing, users received the right information. It was the nomenclature users had around or asking the question that was wrong. It's irrelevant if opacity doesn't technically impact the pass rate. Users just wanted to know what gets the marking on a cub. This confusion around pass rate continued, and Michael kept doubling down on the same angle. Surprisingly, the tactic of hedging around semantics did not temper the community outrage. It turns out that telling people, "Actually, you were asking the wrong question," isn't a great way to de-escalate a situation. The counterpoint to asking the wrong question is itself annoying and frustrating. People are going to wonder what else hasn't been worded the exact way to receive answers. One user framed the outrage in their very straightforward and level-headed comment. "I really do not intend to be rude if I'm coming off that way, but I've spent thousands of golden beetles on marking projects over the course of the 7 years I've been on site where this would have been crucial knowledge, and yet it was withheld, even when asked." This is the part where I tell you that there is an item players can purchase using the paid currency that can toggle the opacity percentage of a marking. The marking opacity changer retails for the equivalent of $1 USD. This doesn't only matter because it means that for years, users had a solution that they could have employed to better ensure markings were inherited. It matters because users who did not like the way a marking looked could have purchased the opacity changer and used it on their lion, thinking it wouldn't impact inheritability. The rest of the thread included Michael doubling down on not being wrong because the questions were wrong. At least that's all the archived contributions to the thread. I won't go into all the comments because they're pretty enraging. I will share that on the following day, a news post was issued on the topic. Anyone who purchased a marking opacity changer between those two threads was invited to submit for a refund. That doesn't encompass the people who had purchased them in years prior, but it was something. In the news post, the moderators apologized for the historic misinformation. In an act of goodwill, they altered the marking inheritability mechanic. If we refer back to the idea of marking inheritance being 2 steps where it first must pass, then it needed to appear above 0%, the new model appended the second step. All it would now take for a marking to be inherited was for it to pass. Then the opacity would be corrected if it fell below that 0% threshold. This situation lit a fire under the user base to start stress testing other breeding assumptions. Even though it may have been a frustrating scenario for both the users and the Lioden team, it turns out that the timing may have been ideal. Had this blown up a few months later, the scandal would have included many more users and could have been harder to handle. Because just a few months down the line, Lioden went viral. In September 2022, there was an unprecedented spike in search interest for Lioden. This is the popularity chart if we look at Google Trends. If we look at my channel's view history for my Lioden playlist, we see a similar spike in October 2022. From what I can tell, this came from a new audience discovering Lioden from TikTok. Let's compare this growth rate to a peer in the browser-based virtual pet game space, Flight Rising. I've made videos about both games over the years. Flight Rising had more popularity up until 2022. Lioden outpaced Flight Rising in user growth from 2016 to 2026. This is based on my own record keeping from 2014 through to today. Flight Rising grew its player count by 9.4 times over 12 years, while Lioden grew its user count by 16.6 times. Even with that difference in growth rate, Flight Rising has more users than Lioden. Flight Rising sits at over 760,000 users, while Lioden has nearly 600,000. Over the period I've recorded data, both games have had an overall growth rate around 20.6%. Currently, both games have about the same amount of search traffic, which isn't something I would have ever expected. If you joined Lioden around 2022, leave a comment on this video about what drew you to the game. Anyways, all of this means that in 2016, Lioden had around 87,000 users, and in 2026, it has nearly 600,000 users. The biggest spike in growth started in September of 2022, just 5 months after the marking opacity scandal. At the same time, I saw a spike in views for my Everskies drama video, which is a game that also benefited from TikTok virality. In fact, if we compare the audience makeup of users for my Lioden and Everskies playlists starting in 2020, not only are they about the same age and gender divisions, but they have a similar device usage. Compared to my overall channel makeup, Everskies and Lioden users are younger. So what's the big deal? This audience turnover and takeover informs who experienced the next drama. The marking opacity mechanism impacted all Lioden players. Everyone who bred lions interacted with the same system and had the same limited miscommunication on how the system worked. Yet, the impact of the drama was contained. The archived thread only had 3 pages of commentary, and the official communication was locked at 9 pages. The next drama racked up 42 pages while only impacting 1 user. On December 25th, 2024, Jesus spawned at the Lioden Giving Tree. Not that Jesus, Jaglion Jesus. Actually, the problem is that 2 spawned. Here's what happened. A user dropped a Jaglion at the Giving Tree. A Jaglion is a type of hybrid lion. Breeding lions with hybrids or mutations is a big, challenging aspect of the game, and this mutation is widely coveted. Remember how we discussed Mengwa hybrid breeding likelihoods earlier? Jaglions have their own unique variables. The Giving Tree is a mechanism where users can pick up donated currency or items or lions. Users can get 1 lion a day from the Giving Tree unless their lead lion has a specific personality type, then they can get 2. A couple of days ahead of the user dropping the Jaglion at the tree, the user announced what would be happening. This led to a rush on Christmas Day as users tried to claim the Jaglion. 2 users placed a request at the same time, resulting in a duplication of the Jaglion. This was a system error and was caused by a failure to prevent lion duplication. The duplicated Jaglion lacked some markings which distinguished the 2. Because it was Christmas Day, site developers were off duty. Site moderators, however, were online. A moderator instructed the owner of the duplicated Jaglion to remove the lion from gameplay. The in-game terminology for this is to kill the lion. As you can imagine, being asked to kill a prized, rare cub made the user upset. There is a pervasive chat box on Lioden's sidebar where users can chat while navigating and playing the game. The owner of the duplicated Jaglion expressed their disappointment with the circumstance in the chat box. Other users joined in, and in the words of the Lioden locked thread addressing the situation, the conversation got very heated, resulting in some very offensive comments being posted. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't imagine people on the internet getting disproportionately mad about something. Just kidding. This is a predictable outcome to the reality of sometimes making unpopular decisions. After attempting to cease the conversations on the topic, it became clear that the moderators would not be able to reroute discussion. The moderators decided to pause the chat box. This did not temper the outrage. Instead, it flooded into other chat rooms and into the forums. Players flooded the moderator request box, developer inbox, and support email. Not only did Lioden's response fields get overwhelmed, but it broke containment of the website. Conversations about the Jag Jesus glitch spread to Lioden's sister site, Wolveden. Other conversations popped up on Reddit. Because this happened on Christmas Day, a limited support team was available to manage the situation. The chat remained paused for 7 hours. On December 26th, Kitty, a co-founder of Lioden, released a news post addressing the situation. After over 30 pages of interaction, Kitty updated the news post to include answers to some questions. It's really unfair that they couldn't just keep the lion. Unfortunately, this is our standard protocol for any asset that gets duplicated like this. If it had been 1,000 gold beetles, for example, the gold beetles would still have been removed. Moderators just shut down the entire conversation. Yes, I'm aware of this, but I do believe they tried their best to deal with a very difficult and rapidly evolving situation, which is why chat ended up paused for so long. I saw reports of IP investigation abuse. As of this post, I have had 1 instance of this reported to me privately, and upon my own investigation, I see no nefarious intent was meant here by the moderator involved. When a consequence is issued against an account, by standard, moderators check to apply it to a second account. It is not to try and catch people out over additional accounts. As per our terms of services, you are entitled to 2. The thread reached 42 pages within the first day. Clearly, this was a level of outrage that superseded what we saw with the marking opacity drama. The community was upset on the behalf of the user who had to remove their prized cub. The community embraced the user who had been faulted. While the exact record of what the user received is gone, Kitty included this in the thread. P.S. I'm really proud how a lot of you came together to offer gifts/compensation to the affected player. Kindness like this is what the community is all about, and it is so wholesome to see people showing acts of kindness and generosity. That is one thing that remains true in Lioden. Users care to research how the game mechanics work. Owls care about answering questions in the help chat. This is a community that just cares so much. That's the whole point of both of these stories. Lioden is a place where users are passionate and engaged. This video is coming out in July, one of the most popular months of the year for Lioden. The July event is an opportunity for players to work together and reach big goals. I'm planning to take on the journey to Redfort Crater and have started to stockpile supplies. Thanks for joining me as we went over these Lioden scandals. I want to thank the Reddit user who shared their very thorough write-up of the marking opacity drama in their hobby drama post. An additional thank you to user Kat for recommending the Jaglion Jesus drama. It only took a year and change, but I finally did it. Also a shout out to my husband for his voice acting. I have a small channel announcement. I relaunched my Patreon and condensed the tiers. At $3 a month, you can get access to a monthly audio podcast where I share what's going on behind the scenes. At $5 a month, you get to name a virtual pet. Use code Lioden at checkout to get 50% off your first month. This code will only work through July 24th. Sometime in the days after this video goes live, I will retire my current king, Bonkle, and instate a new Lioden king. Do you have any traditions or celebrations that you do in Lioden when anointing a new king? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe for more virtual pet content. Bye!